Hello and welcome back. So, in our last live, we spoke about what it looks like to be defined by a vision of your future versus the memory of your past. We dove into that. So if you haven't watched that one, highly recommend to go back because Vorian and I, we are sharing our own stories, which is an important part of the Kickstart 6 week program that we are talking about and that we're inviting in this intimate group into. So go back and watch that as well, maybe after you've been watching us on this one. So there is another topic that we have discovered that is really important when we are doing personal development or we are looking to make a shift. That could be a shift in a career. It can be a shift in where you go on holiday. It can be a lot of things. But that is to get to deeply know yourself and the concept of zone of genius. So basically, the zone of genius are Gay Henrik's concept from the book The Big Leap. He's a very famous author. Highly recommend to read the book The Big Leap if you haven't. So the four areas in where we talk about the zones. The first zone is the zone of incompetence. It's quite an okay place to be because if you're incompetent in doing something, you don't really struggle with it. If somebody were to ask me, Rita, how well do you speak Chinese? I would say absolutely nothing. And it wouldn't feel like, oh, I'm not good enough. The zone of incompetence is there. We just don't know how to do it. The zone of competence, that is a risk zone. Being in a zone of competence is when you know how to figure something out. When you know that, yeah, I kind of know something, but you might, I don't know, YouTube or ask a colleague or frantically start to become a student of something. And you might experience that what you're doing in this zone of competence is something that you really don't like. You just don't like it. To give an example, for me, the zone of competence would be working with Excel sheets. I mean, yeah, I can do it, but I'm not an expert and it really drains my energy. The zone of competence is probably one of the areas I see a lot of people get caught into the loop if they are not progressing in their careers. Then we have the third zone. The third zone is the zone of excellence. The zone of excellence is where you are kind of thriving. You are good at what you're doing. You enjoy what you're doing. You might be very well paid for what you're doing. And you can do it in your sleep, kind of thing. But what we notice when people talk about their zone of excellence is that there is another calling. I love what I'm doing, but they will find other things to complain about. So the zone of excellence is where the majority of leaders are operating today. But then we have the zone of genius. And that's what Vorian and I are going to dive in a bit on today to really identify what is that difference, because it's a big gap actually from being in the zone of excellence to daring to completely come from your zone of genius. So, Vorian, when I'm starting to talk about all these zones of incompetence, competence, excellence, and zone of genius, what shows up for you?
Well, I'm scanning through all four of them and say, oh, when I'm there and when am I there and so on, and seeing and recognizing all of them. And I think we are always in one zone or the other. And we can be because life is like that. And I really like the zone of incompetence because it's a little bit of it's so carefree and something new and you can jump into it and it doesn't matter. Wonderful place. But
It
we
is,
can't stay there all
absolutely.
the time either. And I know I have operated in my zone of excellence a lot, and really good at business development and technology. and loving it, as you said. And then also feeling that there is something missing and not really understanding why. I mean, I'm doing something that I'm really, really good at and making money, and people are asking me to do more of it, and I get praised for it. And then still not really feeling it.
Mm.
And that so it's tricky, the zone of excellence, because of that, because we should like it, should be happy there. Why shouldn't we? Why
Yeah.
shouldn't we be happy where everything is going so well?
Yeah, and I'm thinking a bit about that when you're thinking about you were in your zone of excellence. What did that life look like when you were in your zone of excellence?
Well, I was climbing the ladder, if you so want. I was being sought after. I was being very successful, making money, and I was also having fun. Um, but in that, but I wasn't at home. So but I internally didn't feel at home. But from the outside, of course, it looked fabulous.
Yeah. And I think that is very often what I'm hearing, when I work with clients. And I would say everyone that comes my way, they do operate from their zone of excellence. They're good at what they're doing, and they're in the position. And the outside world will always say, you must be so glad where you're at. You must be so proud of what you have accomplished. And absolutely, they are very proud of all these things. But one of the things they cannot necessarily share with their friends, with their close ones, and all these things is that I'm actually not feeling it. I'm actually not happy. I feel actually a bit stuck because people around there often say, what are you talking about? I wish I had your problem. I mean, with your income and your status and your traveling and your thing. I don't know what, but I wish I had your problem. So, what I've experienced with clients is that when they are realizing that I have a desire to feel more than I currently feel. I have a desire to actually feel joy. I have a desire to be inspired. And to be very honest, I'm not feeling it at the moment. But to share that sometimes meets resistance. And when we're starting to meet resistance because people think you have it all according to them, now the biggest challenge is that we're starting to shut down. We are not sharing. And we're starting even to question ourselves, am I worthy to go ahead and live a life of my dreams? And then what sometimes happens is that a dream life becomes so utopia, but it's still very much based on what they want. But like, well, this is what I want, but it's so far away. So I better just stay here and be comfortable where I am. For me, I can share with you that my really biggest aha moment when it comes to being in my zone of excellence versus being in my zone of genius was quite clear. Again, this is also going back to when I was in corporate. And this is when there is a shift. The energy industry at 13, 14 is starting to hit the wall again. There is redundancy being made. It's quite a scary scenario. And I have, so as a sales director, I was leading teams, but I always taken my people out in meetings. I had a lot of activity with people. Now, for some rules or changes within the organization, I was asked if I could spend more time doing strategy work. So create a powerful strategy for sales under downturning in the industry. And I was asked about something that is in my zone of excellence. I'm really good on strategy work. That is what very often people are praising me for because they don't see when I'm in my zone of genius. They kind of see the work of strategy work. So I said, okay, I'm going to do that. But what it meant to me was that I had less time to spend with the people, less time with my team, being in customer meetings, traveling with them. And I started to experience that I was starting to be more nose down into P&Ls as well, trying to figure things out, but I was mapping things out and I did kind of enjoy it. But I started to sense a edge inside of me, a side of me that I didn't very much enjoy, a side that was snappy. I remember I was sitting in my office and I was working on these things, and I still had my team, but I was 80% focused on my strategy and 20% on my team. When a member of the team would come into me, I would be very short tempered, get to the point, and I couldn't understand why, Vorian. It was something just there, but I was really kind of doing something that I did enjoy until it broke me. This is the same time when I actually was seeking out a coach because I said, I need help. I'm a very bad leader. But I was working in my zone of excellence. But I had been for years actually operating in my zone of genius. So I was taken from my zone of genius into my zone of excellence. And I remember I said to my coach that this is it, I'm ready to quit my job. And she said, why? Well, I feel blah, 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 all these things. And she said, what I'm hearing you say is that you are not willing to go to the board and say one thing. You want to shift it around and spend 80% doing and building your team and 20% on strategy work instead of 80-20. So instead of biting the bull, you want to quit? Like, you don't want to share what you're feeling? And it was like, oh my word. I did share. I went back and things changed very, very fast for me. This is where I do know transformation can happen very fast when you have the right people giving you the right message without, you know, gently walking around, whatever, but actually calling your thing out. Then I returned back. And then I returned back to my zone of genius. I worked my zone of genius. I became aware of it, which is being in deep, meaningful conversation with people. I then decided to create my own business out of that. And that is very often what we see when we're operating from our zone of genius. We start to understand what is my unique ability that I can do all day long in a very unique way, and I feel very energized by it. What is the exact thing I'm doing when I'm in that space? Then you get a business model or the next career level, or you pivot to something else because that's where the magic is. What shows up for you when I'm sharing my story of the zone of genius and being out of it?
I really love your story, and there are so many things there that you are sharing, and in particular this thing about identifying it, because we want to go to another job because we don't want to talk about it or express that maybe there is an opportunity where I am to change it, but I also need to know what I want to change and why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, and having that insight in the difference between my zone of excellence and my zone of genius. And I have that experience that I was spending too much time in my zone of excellence and only being there. And my zone of excellence is a lot of doing and being out there and pushing limits, business development, being creative if you so want, but also a lot of doing. And then not being able to be, leaving behind my zone of genius, I get very empty and tired. So even if I'm really good at something and I enjoy it, but I'm only in my zone of excellence, I get very, very tired and depleted, and I come home and it kind of doesn't fill me in back in a sense. But when I'm in my zone of genius, which is, and what I really like that you said in the beginning, that I am operating from my zone of genius, not in my zone of genius, but from it. And my zone of genius being much closer to my inner being much more in the center of myself, being much more intuitive and perceptive. And when I'm in that space, I'm I'm really in my zone of genius, and things can happen. I'm much more creative, and I can see opportunities and things like that. But when I'm very much in my zone of excellence, I'm a doer. I'm going, 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 and then my zone of genius is like gone. And having being able to be in both and identifying, now I need to go into my zone of excellence, because this is going to move a few things forward. I'm going to use it. I'm going to have it as a tool, but coming from a place of genius, of intuition, of, for you, meaningful conversation. So having and being aware of these and how we can work with those together. But my zone of genius is also, it's not depleting. When I'm in my zone of genius, I never get tired. Never.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's even filling me with more energy, just
Yeah.
stepping into that. So I know that, okay, I in my zone of excellence, great, doing a lot of good work. Stepping into my zone of genius, so I find energy again.
I think that is exactly the thing. It is a place where you generate energy. It's a
Yes.
generator.
Yeah.
So ask oneself, for those of you listening in, how are you feeling these days? Do you feel energized? Do you feel inspired? Do you have a feeling? Yes, you might be very tired when you have done what you're doing. Um, or do you feel depleted? Do you feel like exhausted? Because we want to check in on that. How much time do you spend in your zone of genius every day? And sometimes when we start that kind of work and identifying the zone of genius, I've done work with clients where we are literally bringing in 5 minutes a day in your work, that now you're operating from your zone of genius. What is that particular thing? Because the power of energy generation in your zone of genius can make a big difference, actually, whether you're going to leave an organization or you see, oh, it's about to shift and my gift is elsewhere in the organization. But we need to start gently building
Understanding.
your,
Yeah.
exactly, and feeling it. You need to get to
Yeah.
feel it. We get to
Yeah.
feel it. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so this is some of the things that also we're bringing in over these 6 weeks, because if you want to be, as we spoke about in the last live, being defined by the vision of a future, knowing what makes you tick, knowing what excites you, and also getting super clear on where might you operate in your zone of competence. That is the biggest danger when you're there and you're saying yes to things that you can kind of do, but it's definitely not your zone of genius.
Yeah.
We need to know that. And that is also something that we are diving in on, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and what I love very much, because you were the one that brought me into these topics in one of the masterminds that we've had together, and you have a beautiful tool to, because I didn't know what my zone. This was totally new to me, and I didn't know what my zone of genius was. I mean, it's there in my life, but I hadn't identified it in that way.
Yeah.
You have a beautiful tool to go through an exercise to really start to find that. Yeah, now I understand. Of course, this is what I've been doing all my life, and this is my zone of genius. But it takes a little bit of understanding and doing this tool and work to get it, because
Yeah.
it's something that we don't develop it. We've been doing it all our lives, but since we do it all the time, we don't see it.
Yeah.
So it's to have an opportunity to see it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's by consciousness, awareness,
Yeah,
consciousness,
yeah, yeah.
and see it. Because if you've seen it and you truly felt it and seen it, you cannot not see it anymore. It's
Yes,
there for.
yes.
So again, now we have been diving in on another topic that we are bringing in these conversations, that we're working with you on that. If you choose to join us, we're starting on the 19th of January. Send us a DM, send Vorian a DM, send me a DM. And if you're interested and want to know more, and if you do that, go ahead and say, what is it that maybe makes you inspired and think about to join. That's really good information for us to have as well. What we're going to dive in on the next live is, how do we bridge the gap of being the memory of our past and stepping into the being defined by the vision of a future. So that is what we're going to dive in on then, and that is also a topic that we will talk quite a lot about in the 6 weeks. So with that, have a beautiful day.
Bye.